All right. Hello, everybody. Hope you guys are doing okay. Today, we're going to be talking about Next.js. And pretty much what Next.js does is it makes it really easy to build scalable server-sided React applications, right? So I guess let's get into kind of the introduction here. So what is Next.js? Next.js is a React framework that gives you building blocks to create web applications. You could use React to build your UI and then incrementally adopt Next.js features to solve common application requirements, such as routing, data fetching, integrations, all while improving the developer and user end experience. Whether you're an individual developer or part of a larger team, you can leverage React and Next.js to build fully interactive, highly dynamic, performant web applications. And so you can kind of see that traditionally speaking, you have your client and your server, and I'll get more into that, into the specifics of what that means and how that differs to traditional React. But you can see here, in this picture right here, you see that Next kind of bundles a lot of important features. It bundles all the core functionalities of React, and it bundles link elements. So these are all server-sided or server-sided which, how should I say this? Just these are server-sided things that you'll see how they get implemented in Next. So let's move on here. So I guess we should ask ourselves, why do we want to use Next.js? There's so many JavaScript frameworks out there, and this is just kind of another one. So what makes this different than the other ones? So for starters, I'm not gonna read all of this. I'll just go through the bullet points. So for starters, you get improved performance, server-sided rendering, and which is SSR. We'll get into what that is exactly, but pretty much optimizes your page loading. It puts the bulk of the processing for a web page not on the client. It puts it on the server, so the user end gets a better experience. You get automatic code splitting, so it'll automatically split your code into small optimized chunks, which helps load times, which is one of the big problems React has and is largely criticized for because of its hydration times. Number three, you got an improved developer experience. You'll see how many features they have in it, like hot reloads. It has automatic reloads, error reporting. It's pretty nice for the most part. And it ultimately makes developing a lot easier. It's a lot better than CRA, which is Create React App. And you'll see what that is, I guess. And then there's also static site generation. Next.js allows you to generate static sites, which can be easily deployed, and you have excellent performance. So what exactly is a static site? It's pretty much just like a static HTML file, but the data can change incrementally. That's called ICR, incremental regeneration. Wait, no, it's something ICR. I forgot what it is. Incremental static regeneration, ISR, sorry. And you'll see how that works and the benefits of that. Built-in routing. So Next.js provides a built-in routing system that makes it really easy for developers to build routes and also for clients to navigate. And we'll get into that. That's kind of the first things that we'll dive into when we start our next application. Let's look at some of the cons here. So there is a learning curve. If you're not familiar with React, just a fair warning, the React framework, you're probably gonna have a hard time picking up what we're doing today, because this Next.js is the meta framework to React. So that might be a little trouble if you don't know how to do React, but I'll try to be as open-minded as possible, and I'll try to help out. If you guys have any questions or anything, let me know. So there's a learning curve. You have limited customization. So this is something worth mentioning. So while Next.js provides a lot of helpful tools and features out of the box, it may not be as customizable as some other frameworks like Remix or Solid. These are other meta frameworks. There's so many other ones. And there's a reason why people build these and not use React. Every framework has their pros and cons. And today we're just going to focus on Next. Server-side rendering, yes, it is a con as well, because sometimes it can be slower as it adds overhead on an already busy server. So if you have a lot going on and you're on a let's say you're on a production machine that's really slow, it could add a lot of overhead and slow everything down or bog everything down. That's usually not the case because what's it called? You don't test on a production server or whatever. But you also need a server to host, unlike CSR, which is client-side rendering, like a traditional React app, something completely static. It can be hosted through GitHub Pages and other like free services. This is not that big of a deal because you can use services like Vercel and what's the other one? I forgot the other one, but Netlify or something like that. You could use that to host your Next apps. So that's not that big of an issue. Oops. Integrating other libraries and modules that only operate in the browser. This is kind of one of the cons of server-side rendering because you can't have client exclusive, you can't access client exclusive properties such as window or local storage. These are things that are only the client has access to. So I actually had an issue implementing one of the, this was like a couple months ago, I was trying to implement the IBM's Carbon design system into a Next application, and it requires, like I was getting errors regarding to the window because it requires like if you were to client side render with that framework or server side render with that framework, it wasn't working. I could have just found out a way to go around and figured it out, but I don't know what I did. I just gave up on it or something. And then number 4, it's just another JavaScript framework to learn. Yes, there's so many. And at the end of the day, it is just another JavaScript framework. And again, if you have any questions, just unmute or send a message. I'll keep an eye out for that. So let's get into server-side rendering versus client-side rendering, SSR. I'm going to be throwing, there's a lot of 3-letter acronyms that I'm going to be throwing around. So just kind of get this through your head. SSR is server-side rendering. CSR is client-side rendering. So what is server-side rendering? It's a technique used to render web pages on the server and send fully rendered HTML to the client. And so you can see right here, sending, what's it called? So like when you have a user accessing your site, the server will send a pre-rendered HTML response to the browser, and then instantly it's like viewable already because the server already processed that logic to build your web page. What's it called? And not let the user build it, because traditionally in client-side rendering, it's generating the HTML and displaying the content in the user's browser after the page loads. So this is how React, if you use React traditionally, if you use like an HTML, or if you use Vue or whatever, any JavaScript framework, vanilla JavaScript framework, you will have client-side rendering, which puts the burden of loading on the client, because what you're doing is when the server or when the user asks for resources on a specific server, it's going to ask the server to download the JavaScript bundle, and then the bundle executes the React code, and then you get an interactable web page. So you can see that there's kind of this contrast. It takes longer. You're putting the burden for CSR. You're putting the burden on the client to load everything rather than letting the server do it. And so that's you can see that this approach, it allows for more interactive and dynamic user interface, but often can result in slower initial page load times because you are downloading that file. And I can show you 1 second. So this is our what's it called, our scd.cs.wayne.edu. This is our website for the Society of Computer Developers. You can see that this is a React app, and under the GitHub Pages branch, which is what gets deployed to this URL here, you can see that everything's pre-rendered, right? But the thing is, you have our HTML file, and then you have the bundle, the JavaScript file, which is under static. You can see the JavaScript. It's this massive, it's taking a little bit to load. It's this massive code that the browser has to load to use the React web page, and you're putting the burden on the client to like do all this logic and make your web page interactive. So what Next does is it kind of puts this all on the server, and then the client just gets the output of that, and you'll get a better idea of that once we kind of go into some of the demos here. So let's look at some performance metrics. I just found this. I couldn't. I didn't do the, like. Let me say one thing. This is a Lighthouse metric score. I know Lighthouse is a little. This is Google's Lighthouse. This is a bit controversial because Google Lighthouse is biased. They have certain metrics that they use that aren't really fair. So just take this with a grain of salt. But you can see that overall Next.js, you get a lot better performance because you have way better response times. And with the React performance, you see that it's really hard. It's a lot takes a lot longer to actually load everything because it has to run that React code on the client. So let's get started with creating our next app. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Windows Sandbox here. You don't have to do this. I'm just going to show you because I have like all of the stuff installed already. So I'm going to kind of go through how we installed Next on our project. So just give me 1 second here. So we're going to do, we need to download Node. So in case you don't have Node.js, we're going to go over to nodejs.org and download, I think long-term support's fine, 18.5. That works. So download this. I'll put this in the description, or not the description, sorry, the chat. You could go ahead and download that in case you don't have Node already. If you have Node, you're good. I'm going to download this here. Yes, install everything. And while that's installing, yeah, so it's done. Oops. I'm going to go over to my command prompt and see verified that the install worked. I'll do node-v, and you'll see that I didn't get an error, which is most important. It says that it installed Node version 18.5.15, which is what I just did. And to install, so I actually forgot to put something else in here. You need to install npx. So to do that, I'm pretty sure it's just if you type in after you install Node.js, you go to your console and type in npm-i, or no, I'm sorry, npm-i npx, and then put a -g in there for global. I'll let that install. Make this a little bigger here. Might take a bit. Yeah, you can see that npx probably works. Yep. So I just installed npx, and npx actually has the create next app package thing that we can build our next app with. So give me 1 second here. Okay. Just want to make sure. Okay. So now I have all this. It's like now you could do the npx stuff. So I'm going to close out of this because I just installed it. And I'll put this command. I'll copy this command so you guys can run that as well, just because I didn't write that down. So I'm going to create a next app. I'll do it on my desktop here. So I'm going to create a new folder here called Next. And in here, I'm going to open up my command prompt. So I'm on Windows, so I can just do this CMD and it opens up my command prompt right here. And to install the next app, just like it says it right here, I'm going to do npx create next app at latest. So npx create next app at latest. Press enter there. It's going to give me some prompts. So it's going to tell me to install the latest package. Yes. What do you want to call your project? I'll call it my app, just like it asks. Yeah, I'm recording this. Don't worry about it. Yeah, and if I'm going too fast, just let me know. I'll slow down. I tend to just fly through this stuff. It's my bad. And so it's going to ask us for TypeScript. We're not going to use TypeScript because that's a whole different thing. So I'll press no. ESLint, sure. Tailwind, yes. We're going to use Tailwind just to make it look a little nicer. And then you want to use the src directory. Yeah, sure. That's pretty conventional. And I don't want to do anything experimental. So I'll just say no for this one. I'll just press enter for that as well. And so now it's going to install everything we need to have our next app. And we're going to let that install. and I'll put this in here so you guys can copy paste that. But you can see it's starting to bundle everything together here for us. Should be done in a second. Yep, it's done. And so now if you look here in my next folder, I have a folder here called my app, which is what I typed up here. And then what's it called? And then in here we have all of our project files. So I'm gonna go ahead and do cd to my app, get into that folder there. And then you could run npm dev. I also forgot to include this, but I have it. What's it called? Just FYI, we have the. Sorry, I gotta move this. Okay, yeah. So I have the code here that we're gonna write today on this repo here. I'll paste this. This, if you want to follow along, this is kind of what we're gonna follow. This is in TypeScript, so I apologize for that, but it's pretty much essentially the same thing. But what we need to do is we need to set up Tailwind, and we need to add Tailwind into or we need to configure Tailwind as well, and add it into our CSS, and then we can do npm run dev. So let's do that first. So I'm gonna go ahead and type in this command here, npm install -D tailwind CSS, post CSS, and auto prefixer. I'll paste this in the chat. It's just gonna right now we're just gonna set up Tailwind CSS. If you don't know what Tailwind is, it's pretty much like a styling framework that you can use for a variety of things. It's pretty nice. And then you could do npx Tailwind CSS init-p. I'll paste this as well. After you do that, oops, hold on, don't use that. This is the correct one. And then this will do the, I think this will make the config. Oh, I guess you don't need it after you install it. So yeah, so it's configured now. Well, it's not fully configured. So I'm gonna go ahead and actually open up this code now. To do that, I'm just gonna open up VS Code. Let me get this over here. And then we need to do one thing before we can start running it. We need to go over to our Tailwind config. I'll make this bigger. And we're gonna add a couple things. Oh, it already added itself. Okay, that's weird. I think it already pre-configured it for me. So I guess you don't need to change this. I think it literally just did it for me. That's fine. So what we're gonna do is now we can run our next app with Tailwind CSS installed. So I'm gonna click F10 here into my console, or you could just do it in here actually. I'll do npm run dev. So I got a permission error. Something's probably running on port 3000. So to do this, to fix this, I'm gonna do --. You're probably not gonna have this error just because my whole thing is weird. I think it's --p, and then I'm just gonna do like 8080. This is just gonna run it at a separate port. I guess I can't do 8080. I'll do like 14920, something big. Okay, this is really dumb. Let me try another one. That's too big. Okay, there we go. I'm gonna use this really obscure port here. So you guys probably wouldn't have that error. My whole thing is messed up right now. But for you, you're gonna go over to http://localhost 3000. Mine's gonna be 29201, just because my thing is not letting me do what's it called? It's not gonna let me run it at the normal port. But you can see if I go here, for you again 3000. Change this to 3000. But you can see the next app is here. This is the default template. We're gonna gut it completely. So I'm gonna go ahead and just go over to my. Let me hold on. Before I do that, let's follow these slides here. So let's look at how Next is organized. Let's get a little familiar with the directory. So in Next.js, a page is considered a React component exported from a JS, JSX, TS, which is a TypeScript file, or TypeScript XML file. In the pages directory, each page is associated with a route based on its file name. And then, yeah, so you can see that the directory of the SRC folder, which is this folder right here, you can see that this is kind of the directory that we're going to eventually make, but you can see that under pages, so SRC pages right here, this is kind of where the routing, the dynamic routing, or just a routing in general is organized. You see that under pages, we have our gallery, and like gallery, it'll be JavaScript JSX for us. You could see that if you access the /gallery, like this is the route that you access on your browser is what I'm trying to say. And then the index file is, obviously the index API. I'll show you what I mean. So like, let's see, you have index.js right here under the pages. So if I go, you can see that like this is literally what's it called? That thing that we're looking at right here. This is literally that. This home page is this that I'm looking at. If I change like, let's say like hello, you see that it will change as well right here, g hello, just like that. And then you could see that there's another route in here called API. That's a subdirectory. And if you go to API /hello, so I'm going to go over up here and do /API/hello, you'll see that you'll get a JSON message, because if you look in here, it's just gonna, it's a handler function, and it'll send us a kind of like an express route. So that's one of the really nice things about Next, is you have kind of in-house routing and rest routing built in, so you can have API routes within your Next app, and we'll be utilizing that as well. And here's the console too. You'll see that it compiles the client and server every change that there is, which is really nice. Yeah, so I guess that hopefully that makes sense. So let's look at an example, client-side fetching. So if you use React, this should look a lot familiar. This is what this is pretty much doing, is you have a couple states here that are just managing data coming from this API endpoint here. So what it's doing is this useEffect hook is just listening for when the component is mounted. When it's mounted, you're going to do this fetch request, and then you're going to turn that into the JSON promise into the data. You're setting the data into this state. And you can see that this is all done on the client, and then the data that cuts from that API endpoint gets rendered out into HTML. And this is using SWR, which is created by Next. But this is all done on the client, which, that could be a bad thing, because let's say you don't want your clients to have access to this API endpoint, or you just want it to be hidden, not done on the client. You just want the server to do it, which can improve latency overall. Let's look at server-side props. This is how you would do it through the server. So this is like how you do it through the client, how you get data from the client from an API. This is how we do it on the server side. This is how we do it on the Next server itself. So what we're doing is we have our default page here. So this is like right here. This is our default page. In fact, I'm going to delete like all of this, so we're left with like a blank canvas. And then just add like a little thing here and just like test, and I'll show you. Let me go back to the index. You can see that we're just at test. We also, I totally forgot, we have to configure tailwind fully. So go to your sorry. So we got to go to SRC and then styles and then global.css. Oh, it already did it. Okay, that's, never mind. Don't listen to me. Okay, tailwind is already configured, but I'm gonna get rid of all this stuff because I don't want what's it called? I don't need it. I just want the default. Yeah, I just want this to look default. And let me just make sure I did that right. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so where are we at? Yeah, so I was looking at here. So this is our let's look in here. Do the class name thing to see if tailwind actually works. Yeah, I think it does work. Yeah, I can do that. What is it? I'll do like a H1. Like me see here. Yeah, it works. Let me go back here. So I'll get rid of this as well. I don't need any of these. So what we're at here is what I'm trying to show is what's it called? So this is like this. I need to find a way to like show both of these. Okay, well, I'll just alt tab. So you can see that export data, like our default function, right? This is like the component coming from the JavaScript file, literally the same file as this. It's coming from here, and we also can export a function called getServerSideProps. Now, what getServerSideProps does is it just pretty much tells Next that it'll whatever's inside of this function, it'll get run each request that gets from the client, and then the data that gets passed through will get passed through as props to the actual component. So you could, let's say you could technically fetch a data from the external API, take that data from the result of that promise, and then send it as props to the page itself. So let's kind of look at an example of how we do that. Let me open up 1 second here. So what we're gonna do for this kind of example, or from this like project that we're gonna do, is we're gonna use this service called JSON placeholder. Let me find the link to it. I'll just do this. So these are just dummy API endpoints. What you can do is you can get like this service just lets you have this access to this API here. This is all in JSON, so we could just render stuff based on this and pretend that this is like our external API, because this isn't like all dynamic. This is like static. So we're just going to be using this as sample data. I'll send this link here. And so actually set it up. Let me just make sure I'm doing this right here. Yeah, so I'm going to create a couple of things here. So for our home page, like before we start like playing with this API, we're going to set up like an API wrapper, so we can just easily take data from our API without getting lost in the nuances of our endpoint. So to do that, I'm going to create under src, I'm going to create a folder called lib, and then in here I'm going to create a file called api.js, and then I'm going to create just a constant variable here called let's call this URL is equal to, and that's the API itself. So this will be our kind of URL, the base URL, let's call it that. And then let's create some functions here. So you can see that under under, like you can see that under this, what the URL /posts, you get everything relating to like sample data for posts. Everything under comments is this URL /comments. So I'm going to create just a quick function here. I'm going to do async function. Let's call this get from endpoint. And again, I'm just using the code that I pre-wrote already. And then in here, we're going to have the endpoint itself, and then this will return the promise. So let's do that right there. So const res is equal to await fetch. We're going to get the spell that wrong. We're going to get the URL plus the endpoint. So the endpoint will be like, let me get rid of this slash here just because it'll screw it up, but it'll be like the URL plus, let's say we want to get users. So it'll be just like that. That's what this function is going to take care of. And then we're going to do const data, get the JSON from it, await res.json, and then we return data. And then so now we can create some helper functions like get users. What else is there? Get users. We can do one for get users. We can get to-dos, get photos. Let's build those functions out, at least the ones we're going to be using for this demo. So export const. We're going to export this function get users. That's equal to an arrow function that returns get from endpoint, and we're just going to want to get /users, and so that'll be for get users. I'll create one for photos as well. And we also want one for a specific user. So get photos, and then that's the endpoint / photos. And then we want one for get specific user. And this will have actually 2 parameters in here, or just one. This will be an ID because we want to get a specific user. So I'll show you what exactly this means. But in here, we're going to show how static site generation works. So one endpoint that we're going to build is eventually just going to have just so we can get access to a specific user. And so I'll do like this user, because what you can do is if you do /users/ like, let's say we want to get access to this guy only, like the first guy, we do /1 and it'll get access just to that user and it won't render out everything else. So that's just kind of one of the dummy dynamic routing that they have. Yeah, right here, they said it right here. So I'm going to do users plus like the ID that the user or the whoever calls this function will be. So that's just some of the helper functions. Let's get into the actual routing. So let's say we want to build a dashboard that just shows the list of users. So it's just going to render out this list of users. But the key thing is in Next is we're going to let this run on the server, let the taking of this data run on the server, and not have the client, the burden of the client to render this function. So, or to render it out and also just take the data in general. Because I also forgot to mention, like, let's say you have like a really slow internet connection. You don't want your client to have to wait to get resources from another external service when you could just have your server do all of it at once with lower latency, because ideally that's what your server has. So I'm going to do export const get server side props. This is equal to an async function. And let's make, so what I said earlier was we're going to render out every user in our index, or in like our home page. So I'm going to get users. So I'm going to do, I guess I can just move this to the side for now. We're going to do const users is equal to await get users. So what I did was I just imported it because remember we just wrote that function that we wrote the API wrapper right here. So make sure you type this out or auto import it or whatever. But that's just how we get access to the utility. And now we can, once we get access, or once we get all of our users, we can return it as a prop to this right here, to this component. And so we'll get users from here, but we have to return the props. So return under props will return the users. And so you can see that if I were to like console log users, I'm not going to do that because I'd have to do use effect, but we could do like, I'll just show you like JSON.stringify users. You don't have to do this. I'm just going to show you real quick. You'll see that this is all being taken from the server. The server is performing this request. I'm not. So my console is not going to show me that I made a request to an external service. The only request I made was to this server, or to this to my Next server. So that's really nice. So let's actually parse this data and not just meaninglessly dump it on our screen. So let's do a mapping. So I'm just going to create a what's it called? I'm going to create users dot, or let's first create a div to house all of this in. So div, let me do div, and then we do class name is equal to container. So we're going to create a container with columns of 1, and then when it's small, we'll do columns of 2. Medium, when the screen's medium, we'll do columns of 3. I'm spelling this wrong. This is a terrible way of doing like grid in Tailwind. I'm not that good with Tailwind, so this is just how I did it, but it works. And then we're going to do MX auto, which I think is just margin. I forgot what MX is. Yeah, margin left and margin right. So that's just M margin on the X axis. So in here, I'm going to do users.map, because remember, users is an array, right? Like if you look at this, this is technically all an array with objects of users. So we're going to do users.map, and this will iterate through each user. And from each iteration, we want to take the ID, the name, and the username, right? So because you can see that in each iteration, you'll have access to an ID, a name, and a username, and we're just going to print it out. We're not print it out, we're going to render it out on our screen here. And oops, I think I screwed something up here. Just, yeah, mismatched parentheses there, but let's do like a list item here, and then give it a key value of, let's just call it ID, and then we'll put the name there. And you can see that, where does it? I screwed something up here. Need a unordered list. Okay, I don't know why that's not working, but let's see. I think it's just because I'm what is it? I don't know. This is what I was trying to do anyways. So we got to build a card. So like I want to make every user's like thing into a card component. So to do that, I'm going to create a folder called card. No return. Oh yeah, you're right. that is literally it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But yeah, I want to make it look a little nicer. Thank you for that, by the way. And so I'm going to create a card component here, which is just a bunch of Tailwind nonsense. But I'm going to go over to my SRC folder and then create a what's called a folder called comps in here. And then I'm going to create a component called card.js. And then I'm just going to copy this because I don't want to explain all of this. This isn't a Tailwind workshop. This is a Next workshop. So the code is right here. I'll paste this, just copy this. It's pretty much just a card component with that pretty much shrinks reactively based on the size of your screen. And it also just writes out whatever you want given the properties. You can have a title of the card, you can have the image of a card, and you could also have the children, which is like whatever you want inside the card. So that'll be like the name or whatever. So I'm going to copy paste that. You guys should do the same. Just because I don't want to spend all our time doing this Tailwind stuff. And this is, just copy this. Hold on. Yeah, you also need an import image here. So this is one of the things, what's it called? Next is known for is this image stuff. So this, instead of using a traditional image tag, like how you use in HTML or React, Next creates this component called capital I with image. And what it does is it caches the image request. Like, so pretty much what this does is it takes, like, it'll take the image from an external service and cache it as a CDN. And you'll see how that works in a second. Let me just import next image. Okay, that should work. And then I'm going to do a, let me go back here. And in here, get rid of the list. And I'm just going to render a card. And so let's do card. And I'm going to auto import it right here. And then give it a specific key just because it's iterating. It wants to be unique. Give it a title. So the title is what's being rendered right here in this uppercase semi-bold part. And I'll call the title the name of the person. And then inside the card, that's the children, we're going to do, or we're going to have a span. And inside the span, we'll render like their username. So it'll be like at their username. And so let me return this. or just get rid of that. That's why I was getting messed up. And it should render out kind of our cards here, or not. That's weird. Okay. Oh, it is working. I think it's just something with Tailwind. Did I not configure it right? Let me just check 1 second. Let me restart my next app here. Okay, I don't know why Tailwind isn't working. Let me change my Tailwind config. Where's that? There it is. Oh yeah, no, okay, I totally forgot. So just change this to comps. That's it. Yeah, okay. So I'm sorry, I don't know why I called it comps, but yeah, make sure you go to your Tailwind config, change whatever you want Tailwind to like render through or whatever to have access, whatever how that works. Change it to like your SRC folder, and then your comps folder, and then it'll read all your JavaScript files within that. And then this one's useless because I don't have an app folder. But yeah, so now we have our Tailwind thing working. We have our cards, and this is, you can see that this runs. So every request the user makes, it'll do this request. It'll run this getServerSideProps through the server, not the client. So you could see that if I were to console log right here, test in here, you'll see that it'll console log in this, not in my client. It will not. You'll see that it'll console log here, but if I look in my console here in my client, it will not run. So it runs directly on the server, which is really good for when you do this stuff at scale. Let's see what else we have here. So I'm gonna have another thing, just because we're gonna do incremental static or ISR. So I'll set this up right now. So when we want to get a specific user, let's just make it so that when you click the card, it'll go to that specific user's site. Oops, I did not mean to open that up. Sorry about that. So to do that, we're just going to do like link. And so link is a, what's it called? An element from Next. So what's it called? It just makes redirecting easier. So you just want to use link. You could use ahref too, but that will also, there's special reasons why you use link, which I'm not actually familiar with, but I think it'll just refresh your entire page if you use ahref traditionally. So I'm just going to use follow the conventions here. I'm going to put all this around a link tag and give it the href of /users/ and then we're going to do plus ID. So remember when we did that thing with the API, we're eventually we're going to have it so that like when it goes to that specific user, it'll go to the /users/ID. We're going to be mimicking how they did it on their API here to get to a specific user. So what am I doing wrong here? Do I need something? Oh, I need a key prop. So I'm just going to move that here. And it should work. So if I were to click on it, oops. Something happened. I just need to enter. Yeah, you can see that this is clickable, and for each of them, they'll go to their own page. Right now, we haven't made those routes yet, but we're going to get into that once we get into dynamic routing. Let's use some of the special SEO optimization things that Next lets us use. So head is one of them. So I'm going to create do head auto import head from Next/head, and here we can pretty much like have page specific properties. So let's make it so that in our on our index page, we're just going to have like we're just going to give it a title of user directory. And this is, you can't do this as easy on what's it called, on or on single page applications. This is kind of one of the nice things because you can have this all pre-rendered, and once we'll get into like the SEO optimization stuff too on how this is really good, because you can actually cache these individual pages along with their head properties. And then we'll also give it a meta of name, description, and then didn't mean to close that, and then also content of like all users on the app. So that'll be like our title page or our home page. And then we can have like do some more cosmetic stuff, H3, and the class name of like text gray 400, and say like all users, and then we can add like a slash just to kind of divide it. So you can see that like it just kind of looks a little nicer, just a quick mock-up. But yeah, let's go on to let's move on here. So that's pretty much how we do it for each request. Now that might be bad because you're like you don't want to overburden your server. And so what you can do is you can do getStaticProps, which I think is the next one. Yep. And this helps us with static site generation. getStaticProps gets called at build time on the server side, and it won't be called on the client. So you can even do direct database queries. And what you do is instead of doing getServerSideProps, you do getStaticProps, and you can actually cache these, which is really nice. We'll get into that as well, because these only get called on when you build your Next app, not when you run it in the dev mode. When you're in development, it'll run on each request, which is a note that I wrote right here because I was getting some issues with that. But yeah, so this is kind of nice. Let's get into how we'll do that. So the example that I use, let me just make sure. Yes, the example that I used, I created a different page called gallery, and in here we're going to focus on the endpoint of this dummy API to /photos. And so we're just going to pretty much create like a gallery that will render out everyone's or all of the images on this site. So to do that, let's go over here and let's create like a new page called like our website /gallery. So right now it doesn't exist, but let's create it. So I'm going to create a new page under pages, new file. Let's call this gallery.js. And let's export default function called gallery. So this will be like our gallery page, and we're going to want to return yeah, let's do the heads, like the specific stuff. So for this, we can give it a title of our gallery, and then we'll do the write that out again. And then we're going to do, let's say, all images on, just like that. And we also need to import head. So just like that. And let's also create, let's copy this kind of this header thing that we have, or not the header thing, but the kind of descriptor. Let's call this gallery, just as a little marker up there. And then let's do the logic for getting getStaticProps. Because what getStaticProps does is it won't run it every time the person asks for this resource. It'll only run it at build time. So once you like finish your app and you run npm run build, it'll run it only then. So let's do that. So export const get static props. That's equal to an async function. And then we'll do const photos because we have a route for that. So it's await get photos. So I'm going to import it from our API wrapper. and we're going to return it just like we did it before. So return return props, right? Just like we did it over here. We move this here. Just like we did it at server side props, we're going to do get static props and just return the photos as the props. And then these props get passed down to here, so we can take it from when we actually render our page. And then we also want to, so there's another thing with get static props is you can revalidate every couple minutes. Like let's say your data gets stale. What we can do is we can do revalidate. And we can do like 5 times 60, which is 5 minutes in seconds. So every 5 minutes, like it'll rerun, or it'll set the, I'll just make it simple. It'll rerun it, rerun this function here. Technically, it's not really rerunning it. It's waiting for another person to trigger it because the cache will have been invalidated in 5 minutes. But just think of it as it'll rerun the this request every 5 minutes. It'll be set to run every 5 minutes so that your data doesn't get stale, but that you're also every incoming request, it doesn't trigger this. It just has it cached somewhere. And so that's let's get into, I didn't do this right. You have to put this just like that into photos in an object here. And then now we can access everything about photos. So let's also import card. We'll auto import card. So I'm going to do, so we did that. So I'm going to do a container here, housing just a bunch of cards. We're just going to render out all the cards here. So to do that, I'm just going to do div class name columns of 1. And then when it's medium, we'll do column medium breakpoint. We'll do columns of 2, and then when it's very large, we'll do columns of 4, so that it'll be like 4 per line, or I guess 4 per row. And then in here, we're going to iterate through our photos object, or our photos array, photos.map. And then we want to access a couple things in here. So in each photo, we have album ID, an ID, a title. It's weird. Oh, a title and a URL. So we want to display all these. So I'm going to do ID for like iterating with the key thing, and then title, and then URL. That'll be all we need really. We're going to render out the card component. So I'm going to auto import card, and we'll do image is equal to the URL that we get, because if we look right here, these are just placeholder things. It'll just be like a coming from this website. We're just gonna display that out on there, and then we have image, the URL prop for our card, our title with our title, and then our key is equal to the ID. And then inside the card, we're just going to render out the title. I don't know why I did that, but that's just what I did. And yeah, so you're going to see that photos undefined. Let's try. Yeah, okay. You got to put a question mark here to check if it's not null or whatever. So what we have to do is, so this error right here is pretty much saying that the host name that we're trying to get the image from isn't configured under Next. So what I was referring to earlier was in the card component, when we use image, it's actually taking the images from the Next server itself and caching it. So we have to set a rule so that we can actually get images, like, so Next can actually access those specific images. So like this is just like a safeguard, so like no one can use your service as a proxy. So to do that, we have to configure this URL right here through for Next images to be able to like be used. So to do that, we're going to go over to our next config.js, and I'm going to do creating images over here. This will be an object with a property called remote patterns. And then remote patterns is an array with an object. For the first thing, we want a protocol under HTTPS. We want our host name to be that one that we just had, this URL right here, via.placeholder.com. And we want a port to just be blank. I don't know why that exists, but, and then our path name for that specific resource, we're just going to let it be kind of a wildcard there. And so now this should work. It won't work. You have to restart. It'll tell you once you change your next config, you just have to restart your next app. So I'm going to rerun my next app and I'm going to refresh it. Probably going to be a little slow just because it is a lot. But you'll see that, yeah, there they are. So it'll start popping up all of our images here. These are being directly taken from here, and it'll be cached on the CDN of our Next server. And I'll show you how that works. So if I go over to my app and then go to the .next folder, you can see that there's a lot of stuff here. These are just like, this is one of the reasons why Next is so great. Is if I look at the cache and the images, you'll see that it's kind of got a built-in CDN. So it's actually caching all these images so that the user doesn't have to keep spamming like this endpoint right here. It'll just have it all cached it'll be like available to the end user a lot easier than having to just constantly request on this endpoint right here. So it's actually saving these all on my in my cache. And so that's really one of the really nice things about it. And you could also see that under the static folder, you have chunks, and you'll see that my gallery pages is cached as well. And that's pretty nice as well. So again, you won't actually notice it until you, like, if you build it out and then run it, you'll notice that you won't be actually you'll be requesting it like the resources every couple minutes. It won't be spamming it. But because if I go to like my task manager and show you like my network usage, when I go to this page, let's say I go over here or refresh it, you see that it'll just spike a lot because every request each request in development mode, it will pretty much be running as getServerSideProps, which kind of sucks. But when you run it in production, you won't have that. That won't work, or it'll be fine. So so that pretty much works. It's all cached. You see that it's relatively quickly for 5,000 entries. But it is downloading this for the first time, and you're not going to notice a big performance difference just because like my computer is still having to make those requests. My computer isn't a server. It doesn't have insane internet speeds. So the performance isn't going to be here completely, but you are going to notice that at scale, it's way better, hands down. So let me look at so that's getStaticProps. That's how we cache photos, and that's how we cache kind of that stuff. And yeah, let's move on to getStaticPaths. So the thing is with Next is one of the hallmarks of it is static site generation and its flexibility with dynamic routing. So you can use dynamic routes using getStaticPaths, and that allows for the static pre-rendering of all paths programmatically. So what I was mentioning earlier about like a specific user, right? Because in this endpoint, they allow you to do like /users. And then if I want access to a specific user's information, I can get access to like user with ID 5, and that'll be this person right here. So I'm going to create, sorry, I was just reading chat. So loading all the images would take a lot longer with client-side rendering. At scale, yes, it would negatively affect the user and or the user's experience, the client's experience, because they could have like 3G internet and they have to like, I mean, regardless, they still have to load the data from whatever server. But at the end of the day, if you don't have to rely, the user doesn't have to rely on their phone or their their device when they have the server to do all the heavy lifting for them. So that it creates a more consistent experience. That's the best way to answer it, if that makes sense. So yeah, so I wanted to make, like, if we go back to our home page, I wanted to that if I click on like this person right here, I wanted to have like their own page or their own like dynamic page, and like in there it'll render out all their information that pretty much this API has. So let's create a specific route. So to do that, what we do is let's first run through the creation of our route. So to create like a slug route is what they call it, I think. We go to pages, or a dynamic route, sorry. And I'm going to create a folder here called users, because remember what we want to do is we want to route it to what we set it up earlier as. So /users/number. So to do that, we're going to do /users. So we're under pages /users/ and we want our ID. So in brackets.js. So that's how we get access. That's how we pretty much declare that it's like a dynamic route. I think I actually have it up here. So right here, under users /id, or in brackets id.js, and that'll be under. I didn't even do this one right. Oops. But yeah, no, it's pretty much just /users/ ID. I didn't mean to. There shouldn't be a /API. It would be /API if it was under this route. That's a mistake on my end. Sorry about that. So under ID, we want to render a specific page for that person. So let's start off with let's do our export. Let's do our the default page for it. So export default function, user. So this will be a user, and then we also want to get the data from the user. This data right here will be from our getStaticProps. I'm just going to put it there for now, and we're going to return, and then have a head here. And then this will have some specific user information. So we'll have title, we'll do user.name, because eventually, once we do getStaticProps, we're going to have it so that it'll be like the user is this entire object. So then we'd be able to access user.name and render out their name as the title of the page. And then we'll skip that. Let's create a div here with a class name of MT. So that's margin. I forgot what MT is. What is MT? Margin top. We'll add some padding on the top there. And in here, we're going to have a card, auto import card as well. Card with an image of, I'll get into that actually. I'll keep that blank for now. And then the title of the card will be user.name. And then inside the users, I guess I'll start that right now. So there's this website. I'll link it. Pretty much this avatars.dicebear.com/API/identicon. If you type something random here, like let's say like my name is var.svg, it'll render out like a unique like vector graphics that can be used for the username. So let's assume everyone has a unique ID. So if I were to do like Z, it'll do something like that. If I were to do like Z1, it'll render something like that. So we're gonna have like avatars for each person. So to do that, I'm gonna do image is equal to that URL, and then we'll have user.username, because we're just going to assume every username is unique.svg, and so that'll render as the card's image. I'll paste this in here. I'll just paste this whole thing in there. Yeah, so that'll render once we get access to this user object here. And I'll just put that there for now. We'll get into that because we got to do get static props first. So let's get the specific users props. So this makes a little more sense here. So I'm going to do export const get static props. That's equal to an async function. And we're going to do, so we want to get the ID. So again, we have this slug right here, or this in brackets id.js. So we want to get the ID. So to do that, you have, you need to have this, sorry, I was looking at something. To get access to this, the context, that's what they call it. You have to do, put a context object here. And then pretty much what the constant context object is it gives you access to the params. So the params would be like const ID is equal to context.params.id. Because if you look in the example here, this is a terrible example. There's no context in here. Okay, well, never mind. Well, actually, it shows it right here. But yeah, no, we'll just follow this example. But this is pretty much how we get the ID. This is pretty much how we get like our website /users/ whatever value this is. This value right here, this ID. That's how we get access to it. It's through context.params.id. And let's get the specific user. So to do that, like through the prompt to the API, you do const user is equal to await get specific user. I'm going to auto import that. Remember, because we wrote that API endpoint. No, not there. We did it right here. Get specific user. And so we're going to do get specific user of from their ID. And then get the result of that. We're going to return it under props of user so that we get access to this user object right here. So hopefully that makes more sense. And then now in here, we're going to render out, or we're going to show a bunch of different properties for the user. And so to do that, we're going to do, let's just create like an unordered list here and have a list of, let's call it class name. Let's give it some styling. So make the text small. We'll give it a color of slate 400, kind of grayish. And in here, we'll do like user.company.name, because remember in here, under a specific user, we have access to their like company, and then we can do like company.name, like say where the user works at for this property right here. That. And then we could do some other ones. So let's do their email, because they gave us an email too. So the user's email right here, let's print out that. So I'll do a list of class name. We'll give it a text color of sky 700, which is like a bright, it's a sky color. And when it's hovered at, we'll do text sky 500. We'll make it a little more dim. And then inside of here, we want it so that if you click on it, it'll like send an email to them, or like it'll just trigger like a mail to link. So to do that, I'll do href, and that's equal to what's it called? We have to do the mail to protocol. So mail to user.email. This is just like, and then we'll like do the user.email. What else should I do? I'll just do address. I don't want to do all of them. There's a lot that I've done in this example, but let's do one with their class name of text white. So we'll give it white text, and then give it a background of slate 600, and then we'll make it rounded, and then p padding of 1.5. This is really specific. And then in here, we'll do like their address. So to do that, we can just do a span with their user.address, address.suite. Did I spell that right? Yep. Because remember, they give us their address. right here. So I'm going to do like suite and then their street and then their city. So I'll just print out all of these sequentially. So user.address.street and then put comma there. User.address.city. And so let's test this route right here. getStaticProps. Okay, yeah, so this is another thing that we have to do. So for a dynamic route, for you to be able to use getStaticProps, you also have to set up getStaticPaths, which is the next thing right here. Oh, well, it's this right here. And so this allows, like I said, for static pre-rendering of all paths in a given kind of API or whatever. So to set this up, we have to follow how they did it right here. You're pretty much just sending a bunch, instead of props, you're sending paths with an object of params, and then inside of it, it's kind of complicated, but I'll try to show it as best as I can. So let's first do export const get static paths, and that's equal to an async function. And then we want to get all users, right? Because we want all users IDs. So we're going to do const users is equal to await get users, and this will auto import it from our API or from our API wrapper. And then we want to return paths, just like the example, but in here we want to get the user of all IDs, or we want to get all the IDs for each users. So, and then put them in a params object, because that's just the format that they want it in. For getStaticPaths, that's the format that they want you to follow. They want you to follow this format here. So to do that, we can just do users dot map. And then in here we have ID. So that's like the ID that we need. And then this will return. So in each, so for each mapping or for each iteration, we want to put it in a params object. And then inside the params object, we want to have, oops, I need to put this in an object as well. Inside of each params object, you want to have an ID, and then we want to do ID. We can just do ID like so. So what this does is it pretty much just does this with all users. Or when I say it does this, I mean it does this right here. Like it'll print it out, all users for each path. So it'll generate these paths programmatically. That's pretty much what this does right here. And we also want to give it a fallback. Fallback. So what a fall, we'll give it false. So what a fallback does is, let me check here in my notes. So the route must be defined statically when it's false. So when it's false, it will not work, or it'll give you like a 404. So let me go over to my user. What did I do wrong? Huh. Get users. That's weird. Why is that not working? A required parameter was not received a number. Okay, so I think you got to do like ID and then ID.toString. Okay, yeah. So they just had to make this a string. So pretty much now we have for each user, they have their own like separate page. If I were to click on this, it'll like do like a mail to, it'll like, yeah, I'm not gonna do that. But yeah, so, oh God, no. Every user has their own page now, and you can see that it'll have like their address, and that we can also make it so that it'll pre-generate or pre-render these pages so that users don't have to trigger all this logic once they got into the once they got onto that specific site. So you can actually cache all these pages, which is really nice. If I were to go to like my home page, and click on Glenna here, it'll give me Glenna's specific page along with their card with their information. So that's pretty nice because now what you have is you have all this stuff cached. So at scale, it'll be a lot nicer. You won't notice any performance changes, especially on the dev server, because it doesn't actually cache anything when you're in development mode. But when you build it out, it scales very nicely. And so that's how we do dynamic routing. So if I were to go to like a page that doesn't exist, so this is what the fallback does. So let's do user/that. It'll just give me a 404. This page cannot be found. You could also have it to fallback true, which would make it so that it'll render it, but it won't, but it'll, like this user will be null essentially. So you'd have to actually handle that, which I don't want to do. I'm fine with this default 404 error. That's pretty much it for that. Let's move on. Let's see what we have. So incremental static regeneration. So let's look at that concept through revalidation. So in incremental static regeneration ISR, it allows you to use static generation on a per page basis without needing to rebuild the entire site. With ISR, you can retain the benefits of static while scaling to millions of pages. So you can see that through ISR, through this description. This is the use case for this is really good for blog sites, maybe, or yeah, literally, if there's a blog sites, wikis, places where you're serving to a lot of people, changing data. And so if you cache all this, it just makes it really nice. And with incremental static regeneration, you can make it so that it'll revalidate your data within an interval. So your data, so your pages don't get stale, but they'll also continue to be dynamic and within a given period, while also being cached. So here's how it works. So when a user requests a page that was generated using getStaticProps, so that means, remember, getStaticProps is pretty much, it'll trigger only on build time. Next.js serves a static HTML file from the cache if it's available. At the same time, Next.js initiates a revalidation request in the background, and that's what that cache flagging does that I was talking about earlier. If the data has changed since the page was generated, Next.js generates a new HTML file and replaces the cache with a new version. So that's pretty much how cache validation works through Next.js, or whatever it's called. That's pretty much how caching works in Next.js. And then the next time a user requests a page, they will see the new version with the updated data. And you can see in this example, they have like a blog site here that has the getStaticPaths. So this is all the posts. And then for each time, they'll do like a get request or a fetch request to their API that has all the posts, and it'll cache it just like that. And then every 10 seconds, it'll regenerate the page essentially. Let's move on. So a quick summary here. Quick summary. So for CSR, client-side rendering, the location is the client. So this happens on the client, and it triggers when the browser loads. This is kind of like any React application, any traditional Vue framework, Svelte. It's all just client-side rendering. The JavaScript gets run on the client. So getServerSideProps, this is server-side rendering. The location, this happens on the server, and it gets triggered each incoming request. GetStaticProps is similar to getServerSideProps. It is server-side rendering, but it is involved in static site generation because it only gets run on the build time or when there's a revalidation trigger. And because we have a little extra time, I can get into revalidation, triggering it through an API endpoint. But it'll be run during build time on the server. getStaticPaths, that is static site generation with dynamic routes. That's what we just did. The getStaticPaths right here. That gets run on the server on build time. getStaticProps with incremental static regeneration, that gets triggered when you build your website and when the revalidation threshold is met, or when you have a revalidation trigger. And so let's talk about the revalidation triggers, how we were to trigger a revalidation, because right now we don't have this to revalidate. Like, let's say this page changes. Let's go to just user/2. Let's say this page changes, like the user, pretend like the user edits his configuration. This data is stale because it's just a dynamic, or it's a static file, assuming this is on a production build. To trigger a new version of that page, we have to revalidate this route. So to do that, we can create an API endpoint. So under /API, I'm going to create a JavaScript file here. It's called user.js. And in here, we're gonna import a couple things. So, or actually we don't need to. We're gonna export default function. So this isn't a component. This is an API endpoint. So to do that, I'm just gonna call this handler. And if you're familiar with Express, if you use backend stuff like Express, you know that there's a rec. A rec stands for request, and then there's a res that stands for response. And that's one of the nice things about Next is you can build routes within your framework all in one place. So I'm gonna have a what this file is gonna do is, if we were to go to /API, like /API/user $? ID is equal to 5. Let's create it like let's say this is what we're going to build eventually, essentially. So we're going to, if a user goes to this site, or let's say you're like a backend developer and you need to integrate, like you need a way to trigger a rebuild of a specific user's site. So let's say the user edits their profile, and once they edit it, the backend will send like a request to this API endpoint, and this API endpoint will trigger a rebuild of that static page, if that makes sense. So you don't actually have to like that's kind of one of the things, is we don't have to actually have to make like remember, these things are all static. So we have to, like, if there's a change, we have to trigger it manually, or we can do revalidate, or not, you wouldn't do it here, you do it over here. You could just make it, you could do this as well. Revalidate it every certain amount of time. But let's say we don't want to revalidate it every couple minutes. We want to trigger it. We only want it to revalidate when the data we know for sure has been changed. So to do that, we have to create an endpoint. And ideally, these routes would be secured with some sort of like authentication. But this is just a sample, so I don't really care that much. So I'm going to do a try catch here, just so we can handle errors easier. So if there's an error, we're going to do res.status 400, which is a bad request. That's what 400 means. And in here, we'll do like status is false. Actually, I'm not even going to do that stuff. I'll just do like message. We'll give the user a message saying, or with their error dot to string. And this is just for handling errors easily, because I'm lazy. So let's get the ID. Remember, we want to get the ID from the query parameters. So to do that, we do const, just like in Express. If you use Express, you do const ID. You destructure that from rec.query. And if there's no ID, let's handle if the user doesn't give us an ID, or the person who's accessing this API endpoint doesn't give us his ID. We're going to do throw. We'll say like, please give an ID. So it'll, if we throw it in here, this try catch will just catch it and print it out, or send a bad request to us. And let's also check if it's not a number. So if is not a number, and then of ID, then we're gonna throw please provide a valid number for the ID. And then let's say all is good. Let's do res.revalidate. So this is actually going to trigger the revalidation of, this is going to trigger the rebuild essentially of our website, of our static path. And we want to trigger it at /users/ and then our ID, just like we did it in here, where we have our /users/ID. We're just pointing to that dynamic route of whatever that person gave us to. And then we're also going to do res.status 200, pretty much saying the request is fine, good job, you're good. And we'll do message saying users or user of ID, user whatever numbers page has been rebuilt. Let's just call it that, because essentially it's being sent to rebuild. Excuse me. So if I were to go over here, I'm going to refresh it. You'll see that user 5 page has been rebuilt. And you'll see that if I were to, let's make it so that, let me go in here into ID, get static. I'm going to do like console log triggering rebuild. And then we'll give it like other ID. So I'm just going to show how this works. So if I were to refresh it, you'll see that it'll, if at this endpoint to trigger a rebuild, if I were to do like a get request to it, which is what I'm doing right here, it'll do triggering rebuild of ID 5. So that's how we do revalidation from an API without having to do anything with time. Again, you could just do like revalidate, but this is how we do it without that. So that's pretty much how we do incremental static regeneration with an API endpoint. Key takeaway is res.revalidate the specific route, and it'll trigger to rebuild that route directly. And you can check my cache. Let me check server, or it should be page static, I think, or no, server pages, users. You can see that the slug is here. I don't know what any of this means. It's just pre-rendered stuff. I wish I could show how it does it in production. I'm sure it's a lot better, but essentially that's how it works. If you were to close out of this and do npm run build, so let's say I'm staging this for production, it's gonna do its stuff. It's creating a build. You see that it's creating some stuff. Right. Yeah, it's creating a build. It's collecting page data. So it's doing all that incremental stuff. It's building out all my pages. And yeah, you see that it just triggered a bunch of rebuilds for 1 through 10 because there's 10 users. And you could see that this is really nice. It tells you all the routes that it builds. It pre-builds so that the user doesn't have to build it. The server does it for you, and it'll say it took half a second to build out 10 pages. And this scales really nicely. Yeah, this took a whole second because there's a lot going on there. And we also have incremental static regeneration there, which is really nice. It tells us how big that page is and all of our chunks of the JavaScript bundle. It tells me what I used and all that. And then now let's run our next server. So npm run start. Let me put it on the port. What port was I using? So now my server is running like my official production build server. So if I were to actually just go over to this, you'll see that it's running a production build. I am in production, and you'll see that this is like instant. It's pretty fast. These are all statically generated. If I were to go to /users or /gallery, it does that, and here we have all of my images. I think it's going to be a little slow just because I like my computer isn't a server again, but you'll see that it has everything. It's relatively quickly for 5,000 for loading 5,000 relatively sized images, and yeah, that's pretty much Next.js. I think that's all I have. Any questions? Again, I finished like 20 minutes early, so that's my fault because I think I skimmed through some things, but yeah, there's not that much people left. We lost a lot of people, but I appreciate you guys sticking around. I'll be here for questions, but yeah, thank you. I'm gonna stop recording.